Hello again. The idea of cancelling somebody is so familiar these days that it seems to have been with us forever. Both the idea, though, and the use of the expression cancel culture only date back to 2019, that's to say less than 5 years ago. It's such a big part of our lives now that it's surprising that it is such a recent term. The actual practice, though, of cancelling somebody began 12 years earlier in 2007, and the story of how this popular activity began is a curious one. If there is one thing I've learned over the years, it is that it is often worth listening to experts. That is to say, people who know a lot about a particular subject or whose careers revolve around it. So I would listen to a doctor talking about a medical matter, for instance, or an electrician who is explaining something to do with the faulty circuit. If I should happen to bump into a Nobel Prize winning scientist who is an acknowledged world-leading expert in zoology, genetics and molecular biology, and he had something to say about the possibility that some trait or characteristic was transmitted genetically, I would think it worth hearing what he had to say about this. James D. Watson is probably the most famous scientist in the world. Together with Francis Crick and Rosalind Franklin, he uncovered the structure of DNA. His career has been a glittering one, starting with a degree in zoology and progressing to become the head of the Human Genome Project. If ever a man knew something about genetics, it must surely be James D. Watson. In 2007, at the age of 79, Watson was one of the world's leading geneticists, and he published a book called Avoid Boring People. As a publicity thing for this, he was due to arrive in Britain and going on a whirlwind tour of book signings and speaking engagements. Everybody wanted to speak to Watson when he came to this country. Everybody wanted to listen to him and get him to sign their books. Alas, nobody got the opportunity. He gave an interview to a journalist from the Sunday Times just before the tour, and during the course of this interview he said the following: that he was inherently gloomy about the prospect of Africa because all our social policies are based on the fact that their intelligence is the same as ours, whereas all the testing says not really. Now, when the world's leading geneticist says such a thing, which certainly falls within his professional field of expertise, being associated as it was with a human characteristic which might be inherited and consequently transmitted down the generations by genes, it might be a good idea to listen carefully and perhaps ask him to explain what grounds he has for believing in such a thing. Was it an off-the-cuff remark? Has he studied the evidence for and against this idea? We will never know, because there was absolute outrage that he could say something so racist, and all his invitations to appear anywhere were withdrawn and his book signings cancelled. He was advised to say nothing further on the subject. He had spoken before this of his belief that observed differences in IQ between black people and white have a genetic basis, and he has said that the scientific evidence supports his view. His career was effectively ended in 2007 as everybody rushed to denounce him for his supposed racism. If this fate can befall the most famous scientist in the world, then it's easy to see why other geneticists are not in a hurry to explore the idea or discuss the evidence. Research in this field is a career killer. In other words, the fact that there is no definitive research and peer-reviewed papers on possible genetic differences between ethnic groups in race and IQ and intelligence tells us very little other than that it is a taboo subject and that nobody dares touch it. It's that which explains the paucity, the lack of properly researched material. Since then, of course, we've seen many people cancelled for their beliefs, but James Watson was the man whose treatment in this way began the whole business. You might call him the founding father of cancel culture.